Welcome to the Daily Deep Dive, or 3D initiative of UPSC with Saurabh Kaushik.
Glad to be here.
We are so excited to have you joining us for a rigorous, custom-tailored journey through today's most critical developments. And today we have an incredibly dense stack of material to process.
Oh, absolutely massive.
Yeah, so just to give you all a quick sweep of the index, today we are covering everything from PM Modi's Indo-Pacific tour and some huge breakthroughs in Ladakh's self-governance to the sudden suspension of the Indus water treaty and India's escalating water crisis.
Right, and we've got some heavy economic and security stuff too.
We do. We will explore the highly controversial opening of power bids to China-linked firms, massive DSE military acquisitions, shifting dynamics with Japan and Bangladesh, and the geopolitical fallout of the recent U.S.-Iran conflict.
Which is just reshaping everything.
Totally. Plus, we are digging into the anxieties surrounding the Delhi SIR electoral exercise, analyzing the U.S. at 250, debunking some Pakistan Track 2 diplomacy rumors, and unpacking economic indicators like the services PMI.
Lots of numbers today.
Yep, and we are finishing up with high-speed rail standardization, India's first indigenous shipping container, the start of the Amarnath Yatra, and a crucial high court ruling on acquiring religious sites.
This is a packed board.
It really is. So our goal today is to extract the core GS angles, prelims facts, and mapping locations in serial order, basically giving you the ultimate shortcut to being thoroughly well-informed. Okay, let's unpack this, starting with India drawing a massive strategic arc across the map.
Right, the Prime Minister's tour.
Exactly. Prime Minister Modi is embarking on a really pivotal three-nation Indo-Pacific tour. This is from July 6th to the 11th, and he's hitting Indonesia, Australia, and New Zealand.
Yeah, and this is a very deliberate geographic progression. I mean, the Ministry of External Affairs is basically executing a systematic engagement of our entire maritime neighborhood.
How so? Like, what is the timeline here?
Well, consider where the Prime Minister was recently. He was in the Western Indian Ocean, Seychelles and Mauritius back in late June. Then we had the Japan summit on July 1st. And now, this specific itinerary pushes right through Southeast Asia and deep into the Pacific. So what we are watching here is the theoretical framework of India's Act East policy actually solidifying into a hard, physical Indo-Pacific architecture.
Okay, let's break down the mechanics of these stops because they aren't just ceremonial handshakes, right? Each one has a very specific utility.
Absolutely.
So first up is Indonesia, July 6th to the 8th. He is meeting President Prabowo Subianto.
Right, and this is a big deal because it's their first bilateral since the relationship was elevated back in 2018.
To a comprehensive strategic partnership, right, the CSP.
Exactly. But honestly, what really stands out is the cultural diplomacy play here.
Yes, the temple visit. He is visiting the Prambanan Temple Complex in Yogyakarta.
Which is fascinating.
Yeah, so for our listeners, mapping and prelims focus, just remember this is a 9th century UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it is dedicated to the Trimurti So, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. But, I mean, why emphasize a 9th century temple during a 21st century geopolitical tour?
Because, simply put, cultural resonance lubricates strategic access. Yogyakarta is the cultural heart of Java.
Okay.
So by visiting the largest Hindu temple complex in Indonesia, and notably this is a site where India is proposing a joint archaeological conservation initiative, New Delhi is basically leveraging these deep, centuries-old civilizational ties to build trust.
Trust for what, exactly?
For maritime cooperation, primarily. Specifically in the Malacca Strait.
Ah, the choke point.
Exactly. The Malacca Strait is arguably the globe's most critical geopolitical choke point. If you want a secure supply chain, you really need the nation guarding that strait to view you as, like, a civilizational brother, not just some transactional trading partner.
That makes total sense. And that transition from ancient history to modern supply chains leads us perfectly into the second leg, which is Melbourne, Australia, from July 8th to 10th.
Right, the third annual summit with PM Anthony Albanese.
Yeah, and here the tone completely shifts from cultural diplomacy to just raw industrial necessity. They are focusing heavily on the QAD, defense logistics, and critical minerals.
The critical minerals are the real key there.
Yeah, because Australia possesses these massive reserves of lithium, cobalt, and rare earth elements. We hear about these minerals all the time, but let's connect the dots for you listening at home. This is entirely about fueling the India semiconductor mission, right? ISM 2.0.
Unquestionably. ISM 2.0 is India's multi-billion-dollar push to establish a domestic semiconductor and EV battery ecosystem. And you just cannot manufacture those technologies without a steady, secure supply of lithium and cobalt.
Which right now we rely on China for.
Exactly. Global processing of those minerals is heavily dominated by Beijing right now. So when the Prime Minister addresses the CEO's forum in Melbourne, and he's pitching for manufacturing and clean energy investments, he is essentially attempting to hardwire the Australian mining sector directly into the Indian manufacturing grid.
Bypassing the traditional Chinese bottlenecks completely.
That is the goal. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, and then wrapping up in Auckland, New Zealand from July 10th to 11th. He is meeting PM Christopher Luxon. This is the first state visit by an Indian PM to New Zealand in 40 years.
40 years. It is huge.
It is. And the timing feels incredibly deliberate, coming right after the conclusion of the India-NZ Free Trade Agreement, the INFTA.
Well, the timing is the message, right? The New Zealand leg is fundamentally about execution.
Right, getting things done on paper.
Because signing a free trade agreement is just paper. This visit is about operationalizing it, particularly in agri-tech and climate defense.
Okay.
And it also allows India to navigate the broader context of the CPTPP.
That's the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership for anyone taking notes.
Right. And by locking in these bilateral frameworks with CPTPP members like New Zealand and Australia, India gets this sort of backdoor economic leverage in the Pacific, and we don't even have to formally join the bloc.
It's very clever. It sounds like India is drawing a giant maritime highlighter across the map. But, I have to push back a bit here.
Go ahead.
The diplomatic language is always about, shared prosperity and a free and open Indo-Pacific. But if we strip away the polite phrasing, how much of this is just softly boxing in China?
Well, the polite phrasing is just a diplomatic necessity, right? The underlying architecture, so securing the Malacca Strait, establishing alternative critical mineral supply chains, consolidating the QAD, it is entirely about creating a strategic hedge against Chinese hegemony.
So it is about China.
Economics and security are completely fused here. You really cannot secure the Indo-Pacific without uncoupling its supply chains from Beijing.
Which makes our next development incredibly jarring.
Yeah, this one is a bit of a curveball.
It really is. Because while India pushes outward to build supply chains that exclude China, internally, the Ministry of Finance just made a highly pragmatic and, I would argue, deeply risky move.
The power grid exemption.
Exactly. They just granted a 2-year exemption allowing 4 Chinese power equipment manufacturers to bid for central government tenders.
It is a fascinating contradiction, especially when you look at it through the GS2 security and GS3 economy frameworks.
Right. Break that down for us.
Well, to understand the gravity here, we really have to recall the fallout from the Galwan Valley clashes in June 2020.
Yeah, that changed everything.
It did. The government implemented Press Note 3, which was this sweeping mandate that required strict security clearance for any investments or government procurement from nations sharing a land border with India.
Which basically just meant China.
Essentially, yes. It was a blunt instrument designed to lock Chinese firms out of our critical infrastructure, especially in power and telecom.
Yet, here we are, with an order made public on July 3rd, rolling out the red carpet for TBEA Energy India, Nanjing Electric India, New Northeast Electric India, and Taikai Electric India.
Yeah, it's quite a reversal.
What is the mechanical logic behind reversing a core national security directive like that?
The logic is really dictated by the laws of physics and sheer infrastructural bottlenecking.
Okay, how so?
So India has committed to adding a staggering 60 to 70 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity every single year.
That is a massive amount of power.
It is. But generating that power, say, through massive solar parks out in Rajasthan, that is only step one. Step two is pushing that power across the entire country without losing it to transmission inefficiency.
Right, you have to get it to the cities.
Exactly. And to do that, you need ultra-high voltage transmission equipment. TBEA Energy's Indian subsidiary, for instance, they manufacture these massive 765 kilovolt transformers.
And domestic companies can't build these. We don't have Indian firms that can do this.
Not the scale and speed required right now.
Yeah.
Domestic firms are ramping up, but building a 765 kilovolt transformer requires incredibly specialized metallurgy and advanced winding technologies.
Just to handle the stress.
Exactly, to handle that much electrical stress without catastrophic failure. If India waits for domestic capacity to catch up, the green energy transition just stalls completely. The transmission grid becomes the bottleneck.
Okay, let me stop you right there, because this sounds like we are rationalizing a massive vulnerability.
It's definitely a risk.
I mean, we aren't buying office furniture here. We are buying the central nervous system of our power grid. Smart grids, high-voltage switches, they all rely on embedded software to balance loads.
Right.
And security agencies globally warn that Chinese-manufactured power equipment can be Trojan horses. Like a hidden line of code could allow a foreign state to literally turn the lights off in Delhi or Mumbai during a border standoff.
Which is a terrifying scenario.
Aren't we just opening the back door to the exact same threat we slammed the front door on in 2020?
That is the exact debate keeping policymakers awake at night. But the government's counterargument relies on a really nuanced interpretation of the Make in India framework.
How does that apply here?
Well, these 4 specific firms are not shipping sealed boxes from Shenzhen. They have established physical manufacturing facilities on Indian soil.
Okay, so they are physically here.
Yes. They employ Indian engineers, they operate under Indian labor laws, and they pay Indian taxes.
Sure, but what about the espionage risk?
More critically, regarding your point on espionage, the embedded software must pass through India's CERT-Indy, that is the Computer Emergency Response Team. The hardware has to be rigorously sanitized under the 2023 banning of malicious applications rules.
But software verification isn't a magical shield, is it? Sophisticated state actors can hide logic bombs or sleeper malware that evades initial certification.
It is not foolproof. You are absolutely correct. It is fundamentally an exercise in risk management.
So they are just weighing the odds.
Basically, the strategic calculation is that a domestically manufactured piece of hardware, even if it is produced by a Chinese-owned subsidiary, presents a quantifiable, manageable risk compared to direct imports.
And what's the alternative?
The alternative, stalling the entire renewable energy transition and facing chronic power deficits, is viewed as a greater, more immediate threat to national stability.
Wow. Okay, well, speaking of balancing border pragmatism with domestic stability, that brings us to another historic breakthrough, this time happening right on the physical border.
Yes. Ladakh.
Yeah, the Ministry of Home Affairs and Ladakh leaders, specifically the Apex Body Leh and the Kargil Democratic Alliance, have reached an agreement on a customized self-governance framework.
This is a masterclass in constitutional flexibility.
Walk us through it.
Well, to grasp why this is a breakthrough, we really need the August 2019 context. When the J&K Reorganization Act was passed, Jammu and Kashmir was bifurcated. J&K became a union territory with a legislature, but Ladakh was carved out as a union territory without a legislature.
And the logic at the time was entirely about national security, right?
Yes, mostly.
Because you have the line of actual control with China on one side and the line of control with Pakistan on the other. Delhi wanted direct administrative control without the friction of local politics getting in the way.
Correct. But that direct control inadvertently disenfranchised the local population. They completely lost their elected state assembly.
Which they obviously weren't happy about.
Not at all. Since 2019, Ladakh has witnessed sustained agitation demanding 4 specific things: full statehood, 6th schedule status, which, provides tribal council autonomy like we see in the Northeast, separate administrative and police services, and ironclad protections for local land and employment.
And did the central government give in?
They flatly refused full statehood. They maintained that the geopolitical volatility of the region requires New Delhi to keep direct oversight of security and major infrastructure.
But here's where it gets really interesting for anyone studying polity. They aren't just telling Ladakh no and leaving it at that. They are engaging in what looks like constitutional tailoring.
Yes.
They are bypassing the standard off-the-rack governance models and stitching together a bespoke framework just for Ladakh.
The legal term for this is a sui generis model, meaning it is fundamentally unique, a class of its own.
Okay, so what does this sui generis model actually look like?
The agreement in principle establishes a UT-level elected body. Crucially, this body will wield executive, financial, and legislative powers, but it won't be a full state assembly.
So where did they get the legal basis for that?
To achieve this, negotiators are looking at Articles 371A through 371J of the Constitution as the architectural blueprint.
Let's unpack the mechanics of Article 371 for you listening. How does taking inspiration from, say, Nagaland or Karnataka actually solve the problem up in Ladakh?
Well, the Article 371 framework is designed to accommodate regional asymmetry within our federal structure.
Right.
For example, Article 371A applies to Nagaland. It stipulates that no act of the central parliament regarding Naga customary law, social practices, or ownership of land shall apply to the state unless the state assembly passes a resolution agreeing to it.
Oh, wow. So it is like a constitutional shield.
Exactly. And Article 371J does something similar regarding equitable resource allocation and employment for the Kalyana-Karnataka region.
So they're pulling these pieces to build something for Ladakh.
By applying this logic to Ladakh, the new framework will constitutionally safeguard Ladakh's fragile, high-altitude environment, restrict land ownership to locals, and reserve employment, all without crossing the red line of granting full statehood.
That is fascinating.
Furthermore, local bureaucrats will have their annual performance appraisal reports, their APRs, evaluated by this new elected body.
That is massive. It shifts bureaucratic accountability from Delhi right back to Leh and Kargil.
It really empowers the local level.
Yeah. Now, natively linking domestic governance on the border to the physical security of that border, we move to a massive influx of hard power. The Defense Acquisition Council, the DAC, headed by Defense Minister Rajnath Singh, has cleared 52,000 crore rupees for capital acquisitions.
And the urgency behind this 52,000 crore clearance is incredibly palpable right now.
Why so urgent?
If we contextualize this with the recent Operation Sindoor and the broader instability rippling outward from the Hormuz crisis, the military is rapidly plugging critical operational gaps. The focus is laser-sharp on high-altitude and precision warfare.
I noticed that. The equipment list reads like a blueprint for mountain warfare. Like, they have approved additional Crore ballistic missiles for the Army's rocket force.
The Crore is a really fascinating system.
Tell us about it.
It's a surface-to-surface, solid-fuel, quasi-ballistic missile with a range of about 500 kilometers.
Wait, what does quasi-ballistic mean?
That is the key term there. Unlike traditional ballistic missiles that follow a predictable parabolic arc, up and down like a standard curve, the Crore can maneuver in mid-air during its terminal phase.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this makes it incredibly difficult for enemy anti-missile defense systems to track and intercept it. It gives India a highly reliable standoff strike capability to neutralize command centers or supply depots deep across the LAC.
That is huge. They also cleared mounted gun systems based on the ATAGS platform. And I want to highlight the mechanics here, because firing artillery in the Himalayas isn't like firing it on the plains, is it?
Oh, not at all. The Advanced Towed Artillery Gun System, or ATAGS, is a 155mm 52 caliber howitzer. Operating artillery at 15,000 feet involves fighting the atmosphere almost as much as you are fighting the enemy.
Really? How so?
The air is incredibly thin, which actually changes the ballistic trajectory of the shells.
Makes sense.
Plus, the extreme cold affects the explosive chemistry of the propellants. The ATAGS has been specifically engineered and rigorously tested by the DRDO to function reliably in these hyper-extreme conditions.
So it provides critical fire support for the infantry divisions up in Ladakh and Arunachal Pradesh.
Exactly.
Rounding out the list, we also have the QRSAM systems, quick reaction surface-to-air missiles, and more components for the INS Nilgiri-class stealth frigates. But, looking at this list, the overarching theme here, beyond the tech, seems to be Atmanar-Partha self-reliance.
That is the strategic core of this entire DAC clearance. The vast majority of this 52,000 crore is mandated for the buy Indian or buy and make Indian procurement categories.
Why is that so crucial right now?
Because relying on foreign suppliers means your supply chain can be held hostage during a conflict.
Like with sanctions.
Sanctions or just logistical disruptions. By domesticating the manufacturing of prelay missiles and ATANTs, India is insulating its hard power from global supply chain shocks.
But building domestic military tech is only half the equation, right? Partnering with allies is what really triggers anxiety in our neighbors.
It definitely gets their attention.
Yeah, because following the 16th India-Japan Annual Summit on July 1st and 2nd, China's foreign ministry issued a very pointed warning. They stated that bilateral ties between India and Japan should not target a third party.
This is a classic fixture of Beijing's diplomatic playbook.
The third-party rhetoric.
Exactly. Whenever nations in the Indo-Pacific, particularly Quad members, deepen their defense or technological integration, China issues these statements cautioning against exclusionary blocs targeting a third country.
But they never actually say China.
Right. They intentionally never name themselves. They maintain this facade of advocating for a neutral, multilateral order. But the subtext is glaringly obvious to everyone in the room.
It's basically diplomatic subtweeting.
It really is.
But it's not an empty threat. I mean, hasn't South Korea faced the brutal reality of this exact kind of pressure?
They have, and it serves as a huge cautionary tale. Back in 2017, when South Korea agreed to deploy the USDA, the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense Missile System, Beijing used this exact same third-party rhetoric.
And what happened?
They followed it up with massive asymmetrical economic coercion. China essentially banned group tours to South Korea, which devastated their tourism industry.
Wow.
They targeted the Ladi group, which is a massive conglomerate that provided the land for the THAAD system by shutting down dozens of their supermarkets in China over sudden, suspicious fire safety violations.
Just squeezing them economically.
Exactly. They even instituted an unofficial ban on K-pop and Korean cultural exports. China weaponizes its market access to punish what they see as strategic disobedience.
So what specific agreements from the India-Japan summit triggered this warning this time around?
Several things crossed Beijing's red lines. The joint statement heavily emphasized cooperation on trusted AI frameworks.
Trusted being the key word.
Yes. In the current geopolitical lexicon, trusted is basically diplomatic shorthand for non-Chinese.
Ah, okay.
It's an agreement to build digital ecosystems that exclude Chinese platforms entirely. Furthermore, Japan committed to heavily funding India's LNG infrastructure.
And why does that bother China?
This is designed to reduce India's reliance on vulnerable sea routes that could be contested by China in a conflict. Finally, Prime Minister Modi made a direct public call for democracies to stand together amidst geopolitical uncertainty.
Which is a clear analogical contrast to China's governance model.
Exactly.
So how does New Delhi navigate that? If China decides to weaponize its market against India like it did with Korea, that can be devastating, especially given our reliance on their industrial components. We were just talking about power grid equipment.
It's a very delicate dance. India's strategy is aggressive multi-alignment. New Delhi issued a standard deflection, stating the partnership is for a free and open Indo-Pacific and isn't aimed at anyone.
The usual polite phrasing.
Right. But practically, India refuses to accept a binary choice. We are deepening ties with Japan and the U.S. while simultaneously sitting at the table with China in BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SKO.
So we are just everywhere.
Yes. India's strategy is to be so deeply integrated into multiple, overlapping global networks that China cannot easily isolate or punish us without damaging its own interests in the process.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, while China relies on economic coercion, India is currently testing a vastly different, far more elemental kind of leverage on its western border, water.
This is a major development.
And it brings us to a huge escalation. The Ministry of External Affairs has officially declared that there will be absolutely no revival of the Indus Waters Treaty until Pakistan categorically and verifiably ends its support for cross-border terrorism.
This is a tectonic shift in the geopolitical landscape of South Asia.
Let's give some background here.
To understand the gravity, we have to look at the genesis of the Indus Waters Treaty. It was brokered by the World Bank and signed in September 1960. It is often cited as one of the most resilient water-sharing agreements in history.
Because it survived multiple wars, right?
Exactly. It survived the wars of 1965, 1971, and Kargil in 1999.
Okay, so for prelims mapping, how does the treaty actually divide the rivers?
The treaty divides the 6 rivers of the Indus Basin. India received unrestricted use of the 3 eastern rivers, the Ravi, Beas, and Sutlej. That accounts for roughly 20% of the total water volume.
And Pakistan got the rest.
Pakistan was allocated the 3 western rivers, the Indus, Jhelum, and Chenab, carrying about 80% of the water, though India has allowed limited agricultural and non-consumptive use on those, like run-of-the-river hydroelectric projects.
Okay, so the breaking point for this historic resilience was the horrific Pahalgam terror attack in June 2025. For mapping context, that occurred in the Baisaran Valley of Anantnag. That attack triggered Operation Sindoor, and subsequently, India took the unprecedented step of halting its participation in the Permanent Indus Commission meetings, essentially suspending the treaty's operational mechanism.
A huge move.
But let me challenge the legality of this. As I understand it, the 1960 text has no exit clause. There is no provision for unilateral suspension, so isn't New Delhi just politely violating international law?
That is the crux of the legal battle currently unfolding. You're correct. The treaty does not contain a suspension, exit, or termination clause. It was designed to be permanent.
So we can't just leave.
Therefore, India cannot legally say we are exiting. Instead, India's legal maneuver hinges on Article 12 of the treaty.
What does that say?
This clause allows either party to seek a modification or renegotiation to remove difficulties in its operation.
Ah, so it's legal jujitsu. India is claiming the treaty is unworkable due to Pakistan's actions, therefore it must be renegotiated, and until that renegotiation happens, the operational meetings are just paused.
Precisely. India argues that Pakistan's persistent use of state-sponsored terror fundamentally breaches the spirit of peaceful coexistence required to manage a shared river basin in the first place.
And how is Pakistan reacting?
Pakistan, facing an existential threat, views this as a blatant violation. They have bypassed the treaty's neutral expert mechanism and gone directly to the Court of Arbitration in The Hague.
And when you say existential threat, you are not being hyperbolic.
Not at all. Over 90% of Pakistan's agricultural output, particularly the massive grain belts in Punjab and Sindh, relies entirely on the Indus River system.
90%, yes.
If India were to aggressively exercise its rights to build massive infrastructure on the western rivers or theoretically choke the flow, it would trigger catastrophic drought and famine in Pakistan within a single agricultural cycle.
Wow. Weaponizing water is a terrifying prospect, but it's not just a western border issue. Let's look eastward to the Teesta River and Bangladesh.
Right, the other water flashpoint.
Yeah, the MEA is currently operating with extreme caution as Bangladesh's interim leader, Muhammad Yunus, is reportedly engaged in deep discussions with China regarding a massive comprehensive management project for the Teesta.
Geography really dictates strategy here. Let's trace the Teesta for our mapping notes so you can visualize this.
Go ahead.
It originates high in the Himalayas at the Kangchung Glacier in Sikkim.
Okay.
It flows down through the Darjeeling Hills of West Bengal, and then it cuts directly through the highly strategic Siliguri corridor before finally crossing into Bangladesh to join the Brahmaputra system.
And India and Bangladesh have been trying to finalize a water-sharing agreement for decades, haven't they?
Since 1983, officially. And they came agonizingly close in 2011.
What happened?
A draft agreement was drawn up that would have allocated roughly 37.5% of the Teesta's water to Bangladesh during the dry season. However, water is a state subject under the Indian constitution.
Right.
And West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee vetoed the deal at the 11th hour. Her argument, which remains very valid, is that the northern districts of West Bengal desperately need that lean season flow for their own farmers.
So there just isn't enough water to share without devastating local agriculture.
Exactly. There simply isn't enough.
Because that deal stalled, Bangladesh has looked elsewhere for help managing what water they do receive, leading them right to Beijing. So what are the mechanics of this Chinese project, and why does it have the MEA so alarmed?
Well, the proposed Chinese project involves dredging the river, building massive reservoirs, and constructing embankments inside Bangladesh.
That sounds like standard infrastructure.
It does. But if China secures this contract, they aren't just pouring concrete. They're establishing a massive long-term footprint of engineers, heavy equipment, and potential surveillance infrastructure mere kilometers from the Indian border.
And not just any border, the Siliguri corridor.
Exactly. The Siliguri corridor, often called the Chicken's Neck, is a hyper-narrow strip of land. At some points, it is only 22 kilometers wide.
Wow.
It is the sole land bridge connecting India's northeastern states to the rest of the mainland. It is India's most vulnerable geographic choke point.
So if a conflict erupts?
If a conflict erupts, severing that corridor isolates the entire northeast. So allowing Chinese state-owned enterprises to build major hydrological infrastructure right next to the Chicken's Neck is a strategic nightmare for New Delhi.
It perfectly mirrors the anxiety India already feels regarding China's aggressive upstream dam construction on the Brahmaputra in Tibet.
It is the exact same playbook, just on a different river.
So what does this all mean for the listener? If China builds this, they aren't just managing water, they are buying a surveillance outpost right on India's doorstep. When the MEA says they will consider all related developments, that is basically diplomatic code for, we are watching this with extreme alarm and will exert whatever pressure necessary to prevent a Chinese foothold here.
Exactly.
Now, these regional power plays over borders, tech, and water are occurring against the backdrop of a profound shift in global power structures.
The bigger picture.
Yes, which brings us to a fascinating editorial analysis in The Hindu regarding the recent U.S.-Iran war, which spanned from February to June 2026 and its resolution through the Muscat Accord. The editorial frames the sequence of events as definitive evidence of the decline of the West. Now, I want to make it absolutely clear to you, the listener, we are not endorsing a side in the U.S.-Iran conflict itself. Our focus here is strictly on analyzing the geopolitical mechanics and the editorial's argument regarding shifting global power dynamics.
It is essential to maintain that objective distance.
Yeah.
So the editorial's core thesis is that the initial U.S.-Israeli strike on Tehran, which resulted in the death of Ayatollah Khamenei, was predicated on a catastrophic strategic miscalculation.
What were they assuming would happen?
The operating assumption in Washington was that a decapitating strike would fracture the regime and lead to rapid Iranian capitulation.
But instead, it triggered the exact opposite. Iran retaliated asymmetrically, leading to a 4-month closure of the Strait of Hormuz. We really need to explain the sheer scale of that disruption.
It was immense. The Strait of Hormuz is the jugular vein of the global energy market. Roughly 20 to 30% of the world's total oil consumption passes through that narrow waterway.
That is a staggering amount of oil.
So when it closed for 4 months, the economic shockwave was unprecedented. The global economy suffered an estimated $2 to $3 trillion in losses.
Trillion with a T.
With a T. The resulting hyperinflation and energy prices battered economies across the globe, but particularly in energy-importing nations like India, China, and across the developing world.
What about the U.S.?
Interestingly, the U.S., having achieved a degree of energy independence through domestic shale production, was relatively insulated from the physical shortages, though they still felt the market volatility.
But the editorial argues the decline of the West isn't about the military strike itself, but about how the aftermath was managed. The U.S., a superpower, could not unilaterally force the strait open or dictate the terms of peace.
This is the crux of the multipolar argument. In a unipolar world, the U.S. would have simply imposed a resolution. In 2026, they had to rely on Oman, and surprisingly Pakistan, to act as intermediaries to broker the Muscat Accord.
Which is a huge shift.
Furthermore, when the U.S. attempted to economically isolate Iran, the broader international community refused to comply. Major powers like India and China, alongside the swing states of the Global South, nations like Brazil, South Africa, and Indonesia, they refused to endorse the military action.
And this led to a massive shift in financial plumbing, didn't it? When the U.S. weaponizes the dollar, other nations just find workarounds.
Exactly. When access to SWIFT, the global financial messaging system, heavily influenced by the U.S., became a choke point, these nations simply bypassed it.
How do they do that?
They utilized the euro, and in some cases local currency swaps, as an emergency neutral medium of exchange. This allowed them to maintain vital oil trades and keep their economies functioning. The editorial views this as a watershed moment. It is the Global South actively refusing to be instrumentalized by Western policy, demonstrating that the financial architecture of the world is no longer firmly under Washington's absolute control.
The Hormuz crisis vividly demonstrated our vulnerability to global energy shocks. But our next topic highlights a slow-moving structural catastrophe occurring right beneath our feet, one that poses a far greater existential threat to India than any geopolitical conflict: our rapidly depleting water security.
This is the ultimate internal security threat. The data is deeply unsettling.
Walk us through the numbers.
If we look at the baseline metric per capita water availability, the trajectory is clear. In 1951, right after independence, an Indian citizen had access to roughly 5,177 cubic meters of water annually.
Okay, that sounds like a lot.
It was.
Yeah.
But today, that number has plummeted to 1,486 cubic meters.
For context, the international benchmark dictates that any nation falling below 1,700 cubic meters is officially categorized as water-stressed, so we are well below that.
Correct. And if current consumption patterns and population growth remain unchanged, we are projected to hit absolute water scarcity, which is below 1,000 cubic meters by 2050.
That is just terrifying.
Now add to that the fact that we are currently facing a massive 35% monsoon deficit in 2026.
Right.
That deficit means surface water reservoirs are drying up, forcing everyone to pump harder from the ground. And groundwater extraction is where India's true crisis lies. India extracts an estimated 251 billion cubic meters of groundwater every single year.
That makes us the largest extractor of groundwater in the world, right? Surpassing China and the U.S. combined, I believe.
Yes. Over 64% of our entire agricultural irrigation relies entirely on this groundwater. The epicenter of this crisis is the agricultural belt of Punjab and Haryana.
Why there specifically?
Decades of government procurement policies have incentivized farmers there to grow water-intensive crops, primarily paddy, using flood irrigation.
Flood irrigation is exactly what it sounds like, right? Flooding a field with ankle-deep water.
Yes. It is incredibly inefficient. In Punjab, the water table is dropping by an alarming 50 to 100 centimeters every single year.
Think of groundwater like a generational trust fund. It took millennia for rain to percolate down and fill those aquifers. We are currently withdrawing massive amounts of cash from that trust fund just to grow water-heavy crops in naturally dry regions, and the account is about to hit zero. We are literally exporting our groundwater in the form of rice.
That is an incredibly apt analogy. We are subsidizing the export of our most critical resource.
So what are the solutions? Do they even exist?
The solutions exist, but they require a massive structural and political shift. The government has launched the Atal Bhujal Yojana, which is a massive community-led groundwater management scheme targeting over 8,000 gram panchayats to encourage local water budgeting.
But the real game changer has to be changing how we actually irrigate the crops, right?
Absolutely. Under the PMKSY PDMC scheme, the Per Drop More Crop Initiative, there is a massive push for micro-irrigation.
What does that involve?
This involves transitioning from flood irrigation to drip and sprinkler systems. The mechanics are simple. Deliver water directly to the root zone of the plant.
Makes sense.
This method uses 50 to 70% less water while often achieving the exact same, or even better, crop yield. The recent 7th National Water Awards highlighted several districts that are successfully implementing these conservation efforts.
So it is possible.
It is possible. However, convincing millions of farmers to abandon deeply ingrained practices and invest in new infrastructure requires immense political will and sustained financial support.
Managing an existential resource like water requires accurate data and systemic cooperation. Much in the same way, managing a massive democracy requires highly accurate data on its citizens. Which brings us to a topic generating significant political and administrative friction.
The Delhi situation.
Yes. In Delhi, the Election Commission is currently conducting a special intensive revision, or SIR, of the electoral rolls. But we are several days into this month-long exercise, and the booth-level agents, the DLAs, are conspicuously absent from the ground.
To understand why this absence is causing a crisis, we need to look at the mechanics of the SIR process. An electoral roll isn't static. It requires constant updating.
Right.
In this targeted revision, every registered voter in the designated areas is mandated to submit a fresh Form 6.
What is Form 6?
Form 6 is essentially a re-enrollment application, which must be accompanied by documentation verifying current residency. Now, bureaucratic processes are inherently intimidating.
Oh, totally.
Normally, political parties deploy volunteers known as booth-level agents. These BLAs sit at the polling stations, help citizens fill out the forms, verify their documents, and generally grease the wheels of the administrative process.
But with the BLAs largely absent this time, the entire burden of navigating the bureaucracy falls on the individual voter. And in a city like Delhi, where over 30% of the population are migrant workers, this is causing massive anxiety.
Ratifiably so.
There is a palpable fear on the ground that people are conflating simple residency certification with the much higher hurdle of proving complex citizenship documentation. And again, just as with the international conflicts, it's vital we state clearly that we are impartially reporting on this anxiety without endorsing any specific political narrative surrounding the demography panel or the motives behind the SIR exercise itself.
Indeed, our focus remains strictly on the procedural and legal governance aspects. The core fear is disenfranchisement by default.
How does that happen?
Well, if a daily wage earner cannot afford to take a day off work or cannot understand the paperwork without a BLA's help, they might fail to submit Form 6. The anxiety is that this failure will lead to mass, automatic deletions from the voter rolls.
Did the Supreme Court weigh in on this exact scenario recently?
Yes, the Supreme Court issued a very clear ruling on May 27th. The court upheld the constitutional validity of the SIR exercise, affirming that the Election Commission has the absolute mandate to verify and clean electoral rolls to prevent voter fraud.
Okay, so the exercise itself is legal.
However, the court drew a firm, uncrossable line regarding the scope of the exercise. The EC can verify a voter's eligibility based on their current residency. It absolutely cannot use this Form 6 revision process to adjudicate an individual's citizenship.
That is a very important distinction.
Furthermore, the court mandated that any deletion from the voter rolls cannot be automatic. It requires a rigorous, multi-step process, issuing a formal notice to the voter, conducting a hearing, and providing the opportunity to appeal.
But the reality on the ground is that without the BLAs to guide them, the risk of citizens getting lost in this procedural friction and losing their right to vote remains incredibly high.
That is the real danger.
Speaking of foundational democratic rights, we move to a massive milestone for the world's oldest continuous democracy. Today, July 4th, 2026, marks the 250th anniversary of the United States Declaration of Independence.
It is a profound moment for comparative polity.
It really is.
In 1776, the United States was founded on radical Enlightenment ideals, the assertion that all men are created equal, the concept of popular sovereignty, and the inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. 2.5 centuries later, it remains the preeminent global superpower.
But the editorial analysis we are reviewing today points out a very stark contrast. It juxtaposes those lofty 1776 ideals with the modern political reality of the U.S., a nation currently grappling with intense internal polarization and a highly transactional America First nationalism that heavily characterized the Trump era and continues to influence policy.
It's a very different landscape now.
It raises the debate. Is America in a period of structural decline, or is it merely preparing for another phase of reinvention?
That is the enduring question of American history, isn't it? But for our purposes, we must analyze this anniversary specifically from the Indian perspective. Why does a celebration in Washington matter so deeply in New Delhi?
Right.
It matters on both highly practical and deeply ideological levels.
Let's start with the practical. The U.S. is an economic juggernaut for us.
Exactly. The U.S. is India's largest single-country trading partner, with bilateral trade volumes hitting approximately $190 billion.
Which is massive.
Furthermore, as we discussed with the Indo-Pacific tour, the U.S. is the foundational pillar of the QUA and a critical supplier of advanced defense technology. More immediately, negotiators from both nations are aggressively pushing to finalize a bilateral trade agreement, a BTA, with a target deadline of August 15th.
August 15th, naturally, being India's own Independence Day. That symbolic alignment is clearly intentional.
It is, because the ideological link between the two nations is historically profound. India's own independence movement drew significant inspiration from American democratic ideals.
Really? How so?
When you analyze Jawaharlal Nehru's famous Tryst with Destiny speech, the echoes of the 1776 Declaration are unmistakable themes of universal human rights, liberty, and the right to national self-determination.
That makes a lot of sense.
The 250th anniversary is a critical moment for policymakers to reflect on how those shared, foundational democratic values underpin the modern strategic partnership. It provides a stabilizing anchor, even when navigating the deeply transactional, sometimes erratic nature of current U.S. foreign policy.
While India and the U.S. negotiate massive trade agreements openly, the diplomatic world is always rife with rumors about back-channel talks and other, far more volatile relationships. Which brings us to a quick but vital fact check. There have been persistent, widely circulated claims recently regarding ongoing Track 2 diplomacy between India and Pakistan.
Let me jump in right there. Track 2 diplomacy refers to unofficial, non-governmental dialogues, often involving retired officials or academics, used to explore solutions when official Track 1 diplomacy is frozen.
Right, the behind-the-scenes stuff.
Exactly. However, an analysis from the intelligence community has definitively debunked these claims. The rumors of secret back-channel talks with Islamabad are entirely fabricated.
And logically, this aligns perfectly with the hardline stance we unpacked earlier regarding the Indus Waters Treaty. The message radiating from New Delhi is absolute and consistent across all channels. There will be no engagement, public or private, official or Track 2, until the infrastructure of state-sponsored cross-border terrorism is verifiably dismantled.
Fact-checking those narratives is essential for understanding diplomatic posture.
Definitely.
But while diplomacy often deals in rhetoric, economics deals in raw data. And the data brings us to a concerning development. We have some warning lights flashing on the GS3 economy dashboard. The Services Purchasing Managers Index, the PMI, has just dropped to a new low. Concurrently, banking data is revealing significant emerging stress in the small-ticket loan sector.
Okay, let's break this down for the listener. What exactly is the Services PMI, and what does this combination of indicators signal to a macroeconomist?
The Purchasing Managers Index is a real-time gauge of economic health. A PMI above 50 indicates expansion. Below 50 indicates contraction. The Services PMI tracks sectors like IT, hospitality, finance, and transport. A dip in this index suggests that the service sector, which is a massive engine of Indian GDP, is experiencing slowing growth or reduced demand.
And when you pair that slowing demand with the stress in small-ticket loans, meaning loans taken out by micro-enterprises or individual consumers at the lower end of the income spectrum,
it creates a troubling picture of a K-shaped or highly unequal economic recovery.
What does that mean for the average person?
It suggests that while the macroeconomic aggregates look strong, driven by massive government capital expenditure on infrastructure and defense acquisitions, there is intense friction at the grassroots level. Small businesses and lower-income individuals are struggling with liquidity, inflation, or debt repayment. It's a vital indicator that policymakers must address to ensure growth is broad-based and not just concentrated at the top.
Despite those acute short-term stresses, India is aggressively laying down the physical capital intended to drive economic velocity for the next 50 years. This brings us to the future of India's high-speed rail network. The National High-Speed Rail Corporation, the NHSRC, has made a monumental strategic pivot. They have decided to standardize a unified, indigenous high-speed rail platform capable of operating at 250 to 350 kilometers per hour.
This is perhaps one of the most brilliant long-term infrastructure decisions made this decade.
Why is this such a big deal?
To understand why, we have to look at the previous trajectory. India was heading toward a highly fragmented technological landscape. We imported Japanese Shinkansen technology for the flagship Mumbai-Ahmedabad corridor.
Right.
But there were ongoing discussions about utilizing French TGV technology or perhaps German systems for other proposed routes, like Delhi-Amritsar or Mumbai-Nagpur.
Let me jump in with an analogy. That sounds like trying to run a massive household where every single appliance requires a completely different shape of wall outlet and a different voltage. It's a logistical nightmare.
That is exactly what it is. Fragmented rail tech means you need entirely different maintenance depots for each line. Your engineers have to be trained on completely different software and signaling systems. You have to stockpile separate inventories of spare parts, sourced from different international vendors.
By developing a unified indigenous platform, a single technological standard for all future high-speed corridors, the NHSRC estimates they can achieve massive economies of scale. They are projecting a reduction in per-kilometer construction and operational costs by an astonishing 30 to 40%. It standardizes training, simplifies maintenance, and crucially, reduces our reliance on foreign rail consortiums.
And this theme of untethering our physical infrastructure from foreign monopolies brings us to a highly significant milestone in logistics. The Ports Minister has just announced the successful rollout of India's first commercially produced EXIM export-import shipping container. It was manufactured right here in Gujarat by a startup backed by Tata Steel.
Now, to the average person, a steel box sounds incredibly mundane. But let's explain the global context because it is staggering. Approximately 98% of all shipping containers globally are manufactured by Chinese state-backed enterprises. 98%.
It is a near-absolute monopoly. And India, to sustain its growing export-import trade, is forced to import over 500,000 of these containers every single year.
That is a massive annual drain on our foreign exchange reserves, but more importantly, it is a glaring supply chain vulnerability. If geopolitical tensions flare, Beijing could theoretically throttle the supply of the literal boxes we need to move our goods.
Precisely. By successfully engineering and manufacturing our own standard 20-foot TEU's 20-foot equivalent units, we are securing a foundational node in our logistics network. It keeps that capital circulating within the domestic economy, supports the local steel industry, and insulates our trade from Chinese monopolistic pressure. It is a purest execution of targeted Make in India substituting a critical strategic import.
And secure infrastructure, whether it's high-speed rail corridors or indigenous shipping containers, doesn't just facilitate commerce and defense, it facilitates the safe expression of deeply held cultural and religious traditions. Which brings us to the Himalayas. Today, July 4th, marks the official kickoff of the Amarnath Yatra for the 2026 season. Over 12,000 pilgrims made the arduous trek to the cave shrine on day one alone.
For our mapping focus, the Amarnath Cave is situated at a staggering altitude of 3,888 meters in the Anantnag district of Jammu and Kashmir.
That is incredibly high up.
It is. It is renowned for the naturally formed ice Shiva Lingam and stands as one of the most significant Hindu pilgrimages, drawing anywhere from 4 to 8 lakh devotees over the brief summer window.
But the GS2 internal security angle is paramount here. The pilgrimage is operating under an incredibly tight, multi-layered security grid managed by the CRPF, the Army, and J&K Police.
Which is absolutely necessary.
Right. And this ties directly back to a very dark context we discussed earlier regarding the Indus Waters Treaty. The suspension of that treaty was directly triggered by the June 2025 terror attack in Pahalgam, which serves as the traditional base camp area for this very yatra. The state is utilizing immense resources and logistical planning to ensure the absolute safety of these pilgrims in a hypersensitive, highly militarized zone.
Which leads us to a fascinating legal and ethical intersection for our final analysis today. What happens when the state's aggressive push for massive public infrastructure collides directly with religious sites?
We just saw a definitive high court ruling on this exact issue. The court firmly affirmed that the government possesses the legal power of eminent domain to acquire religious sites if they are deemed strictly essential for public infrastructure projects.
This is a landmark ruling for GS2 polity and judiciary. Let's define the mechanics. Eminent domain is the inherent power of the sovereign state to expropriate private property for public use, provided there is fair and just compensation.
But applying that to religious sites has to be complicated.
It always presents an incredibly complex challenge. It pits the secular utilitarian drive for national development, building highways, expanding rail networks, against the fundamental, constitutionally protected right to freedom of religion.
So what was the court's rationale?
The High Court's ruling establishes a clear legal hierarchy. It states that religious properties, whether temples, mosques, or churches, do not enjoy blanket immunity from acquisition. If an essential public project, say a critical national highway expansion, genuinely requires that specific parcel of land for the greater public good, and no viable alternative alignment exists, the state has the constitutional authority to acquire it. It requires strict adherence to due process, but it is a powerful reaffirmation that the secular state's developmental mandate supersedes religious exceptionalism.
Wow. We have covered an immense expanse of ground today, from the high-altitude artillery ranges of Ladakh to the diplomatic corridors of the South Pacific. Today, we saw India actively suspending a water treaty on its western border, while expressing intense alarm over China's water infrastructure plans on its eastern border. We see India systematically shilling out Chinese digital platforms, while simultaneously welcoming Chinese power grid manufacturers to build our domestic infrastructure. We are standardizing our own high-speed rail while navigating the complexities of multi-alignment in a world still reeling from the economic shocks of the U.S.-Iran conflict. As you digest all this information, I want to leave you with a provocative thought to mull over. In an increasingly multipolar world where the old rules don't apply, is inconsistency actually India's greatest strategic weapon? Thank you for joining this deep dive. You are now armed with the insights to understand not just the headlines, but the underlying mechanics driving the world.